Good evening, guys. Welcome back to Pawpaw Storytime. It is about our normal time, although I'm 2 days late, which I apologize for. I've been sick the last few days. I'm on the mend. I'm almost 100%. I did have to get out and do some running earlier today, and I think I feel good enough to do this. And then, let me see, a couple of things. Oh, hey, look, I got a new bookshelf in here. So I'm gonna have you guys help me. I got this thing set up, in such a way that you guys are gonna be able to help me pick some of the stories that I'm gonna read through the course of next year. Like, it won't be every one. Like a holiday books stories will be picked out already. Some of those will be the same. Some of them will be new. And then I've got 4 categories on 2 different shelves. And anytime I need your guys' help, I'm going to ask you to vote in the comments. And I know that's going to be for everybody because my grandkids don't always get to watch. And the ones that do get to watch don't always get to watch every episode. So I'll need anybody who's watching to participate and help me vote. I'll need you guys to choose either row 1 or row 2. And then you'll choose spot 1, 2, 3, or 4. So you'll choose row 1, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you'll choose 2, and then you'll choose one of the spots. I'm gonna get that thing labeled, and we're not gonna start that for probably a couple more weeks. I've got this one and 2 more story times already scheduled, and then after that we'll probably do something along those lines where if it's not a holiday coming up, then 1 week I'll choose from one of the categories, and the next week you guys will choose from one of the categories, and we'll just go through until we get all the stories written. I've got some ones that we got that were autographed, some from famous authors, some were just newish, some were recommendations from people that I know or that we knew, or they were gifts. And then I've got still 2 small sections of the ones that were donated a couple years ago after we had the fire, from the friend that I went to school with, from the school that she works at, that donated all the crates of books. We still got 2 small sections of those. I've got 1 category on the first shelf that's they're like multiple reads, or it's going to take multiple times to get through the book, or both. That'll be a category. I got some original Dr. Seuss's in a category, and then some more educational ones that are in a second category. I got another category that are Dr. Seuss. They weren't written by Dr. Seuss, but they were part of his, I'll just grab one. They were part of I Can Read It All By Myself beginner books, and they're written by different authors, but they had the Dr. Seuss seal right there. That'll be another category. And then we've still got several books in the Help Me Be Good series, the ones with the little frogs that help the little boy and the girl. And then I've got a whole section down at the bottom for anytime we have guest readers who want to read something that's not, that can be on a littler kid level. So any of you guys that are here to help read, if you're a kid, I've got something for you to read. If you're an older kid, I got something for you to read. And if you're an adult, we got something for you to read. Let me see. Yeah, so when I went to lay everything out, to queue everything and get it all scheduled for the year, I decided that this would be more interactive. It'd be easier. And then I can also take every now and again when people gift us books for here, I can fill them in different spots. And I think that's it. I think we can get started reading. Let me see. Still got all the guys up here. New Pawpaw Storytime, Daniel Tiger, all the grandkids, 50 button. I need to start wearing my buttons again now that the holidays are over. I got to remember that Louie and Bingo and Stitch are up here waiting to be worn. We're going to start off today with Don't Sweat the Small Stuff for the Teens edition. This is chapter 14, page 39. Make peace with your mistakes. One of the most powerful and inspirational spiritual awakenings and a surefire way to become happier is to make peace with your mistakes. I'm not talking about paying lip service to the wisdom by saying, "Sure, I know everyone makes mistakes," but instead by genuinely making peace with the fact that mistakes are not only inevitable, but they're important. I read about a Zen master who described life as one mistake after another. And if you think about it, he was right. From a certain perspective, life can be described as a series of mistakes, one right after another, with a little space in between. We mess up, make amends, and change. We then go on with our lives. Sooner or later, we make another mistake, learn from it, make the necessary adjustments, and move on. The mistakes offer us the continual opportunity to learn and evolve. Without them, there would be no growth, no reasons to change. Accepting this idea makes it much easier to forgive ourselves and others when we, or they, mess up. It's almost impossible to be too hard on yourself for anyone else when you see the importance of mistakes in the bigger scheme of things. Obviously, this isn't to say that we make mistakes on purpose or that we don't do our best to avoid them. That would be ridiculous. Nor does it suggest that we condone or enjoy the mistakes of others, because we don't. What I'm suggesting, however, is that mistakes are the way we learn to make allowances in our thinking and behavior. They are the things that encourage us to change direction and to grow as human beings. Think of the world's best athletes. I was watching Andre Agassi, one of the top tennis players in the world, play a match. It made me feel better about my game when I realized that even the world's best players make plenty of mistakes. I read somewhere that the baseball great Babe Ruth struck out twice for every home run that he hit. That really puts things into perspective. When I was 14 years old, I was talking behind someone else's back to a mutual friend. I was being mean-spirited and spreading a vicious rumor. I didn't know it, but the person I was bad-mouthing was standing right behind me and heard everything I said. He was crushed, and I was embarrassed. This was a mistake I've never forgotten. This mistake, however, was one of thousands that I made that helped me to become the person I am today. I learned more from that mistake than I could have learned in any class, lecture, or book. It hit me hard where it counts, in my heart. I didn't enjoy it. I'm not proud of it, but boy, did I learn from it. I'm a kinder person today because of it. Everyone makes mistakes, big ones and small ones. You can see your mistakes as a means to help you become a better person and to make better decisions. You'll be able to be easier on yourself and get through difficult times much easier. In the long run, you'll make fewer mistakes. And if people have made mistakes that have hurt you or affected you negatively, you can apply the same philosophy to help you forgive those people so that you can move forward with greater ease and confidence. And I like that. Life is a bunch of series of mistakes that we learn from. Nobody knows how to do anything when they're first born except for cry, breathe, and eat. Go to the bathroom. You learn everything. Everything is learned. And I definitely know about big mistakes, even the mistakes that you know that you're doing something bad when you're doing them. I've made my fair share of those, more than I care to count. But I learned from all of them, and I'm a way better person today because I did learn from them. I was a slow learner. It took me a very long time where it didn't take a lot of other people as long probably, but when I changed, I tried to change it all. I try to be a good person, and I try to be kinder to people as I go, and I try to be grateful for everything that I have. Okay, let's move on to the book we're going to read this week. Mrs. Toggle's Zipper by Robin Pulver. Oh, and I still need to make a note to get that. I need to try to find a reverse camera thing. Okay, Mrs. Toggle's Zipper. Starts with a picture. When Mrs. Toggle's children arrived at school in the morning, they changed in the hall from their boots to their shoes. When the bell rang, they picked up their boots and book bags and marched along to their room. They stuffed the boots and bags into their cubby holes and hung up their coats. Then they sat down at their desks. "Good morning, Mrs. Toggle," the children said in their best morning voices. "Good morning, class," said Mrs. Toggle in an unusually grumpy voice. Then the children noticed that Mrs. Toggle was still wearing her coat, the big puffy fuchsia-colored one that she got for Christmas. "Miss Toggle," yelled Joey, "you forgot to take your coat off." "I didn't forget," said Mrs. Toggle uncomfortably. "I can't take it off because the zipper's stuck. I'm afraid it's going to be a long, hot day." "How'd the zipper get stuck?" Nina asked. Mrs. Toggle fanned her face. "How does any zipper get stuck? First, a tiny bit of cloth gets caught in it, then you pull and keep pulling a little too hard, and before you know it, you're trapped in your coat like a hand in a cookie jar." The children gathered around Mrs. Toggle's desk to see for themselves. "Yup," said Joey, "that zipper sure is stuck." The others nodded. "What's worse," said Mrs. Toggle, "that thingamajig is gone." "The what?" said the children. "The thingamajig that you pull the zipper up and down with. Mine is lost." "Oh," groaned the children. They all thought happily about their own coats hanging on hooks with zippers that open and thingamajigs still on them. "Maybe we can help," said Caroline. "It's worth a try," said Mrs. Toggle. Mrs. Toggle braced her feet on the floor. She leaned forward in her chair and held out her arms. Some children grabbed one sleeve and some the other. Paul and Nina grabbed fistfuls of collar. "Now!" yelled Mrs. Toggle. Everybody pulled, and everybody landed with thuds and bumps in a heap on the floor. Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Paul wanted to get busy learning the times tables. "Mrs. Toggles," he said, "let's go to the nurse's office. Maybe Mrs. Schott can help you." Almost looks like that's not in focus, ain't it? It's just the artwork. So Mrs. Toggle and the children trudged down to the office to Mrs. Schott's, the school nurse. When Miss Schott saw Mrs. Schott saw Mrs. Toggle's hot red face, she reached for the thermometer and popped it into Mrs. Toggle's mouth. Mrs. Toggle shook her head. "Adon rubber to rubber. Don't talk with the thermometer in your mouth," she said. "I'll telephone your mother." "Adon lewif my mudder," mumbled Mrs. Toggle. "Mouth closed," ordered Mrs. Schott. Nina spoke up. "She's not sick. She doesn't live with her mother because she's a grown-up. Mrs. Toggle is hot because she can't get her coat off. The zipper's stuck and the thingamajig is lost." "Then we must pull it off," said Mrs. Schott. "Oh, we tried that," Paul said. "This time we'll add a bandage," the nurse answered. "Bandages make boo-boos better. But first, Mrs. Toggle, you must take the thermometer out of your mouth." Mrs. Schott stuck a bandage on the zipper where the thingamajig was supposed to be. Then she pulled, and the children pulled, and they all ended up with thuds and bumps and bangs on the floor of Mrs. Schott's office. Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Mrs. Schott shook her head. "I must call the principal. He'll know what to do with you." The principal, Mr. Stickler, left important matters on his desk to hurry to the nurse's office. Mr. Stickler frowned when he saw Mrs. Toggle. "Mrs. Toggle, it's against school rules to wear your coat all day." "I am sorry," said Mrs. Toggle, but I can't take my coat off. The zipper is stuck. Tell him about this thingamajig, said Nina. The what? Mr. Stickler asked. You know, said Paul. The what's it? The doodad, said Carolyn. The whatchamacallit, said Joey. My students are right, said Mrs. Toggle. The thingamajig is missing from my zipper. The principal frowned again. Mrs. Toggle, he said, in my job I have learned that if you want to get out of a tight spot, you must follow the rules. Pay attention, children, he said. Make 2 straight lines. One line pull on the right arm, the other line pull on the left. Mrs. Schott, you be responsible for the collar, and I shall pull on Mrs. Toggle's feet. We've tried that, said Joey. Pulling doesn't work, Nina agreed. Did you make straight lines? Asked Mr. Strickler. Well, that's the rule. Stay in straight lines. Now get ready, get set, pull. You guys think that worked? The children and Mrs. Schott pulled in one direction. Mr. Stickler pulled in the other direction. Mrs. Toggle tried to make herself small and wriggly, but with thuds, bumps, bangs, and a kerplop, they all ended up on the floor once more. And Mrs. Toggle's collar was as far as her nose, but no further than that. Mr. Strickler said, enough of this. We don't want holes in the janitor's floor just because of Mrs. Toggle's zipper. I'm calling the custodian. I'm afraid he'll have to cut this coat off. No, yelled the children. Mrs. Toggle cried, never. The custodian, Mr. Abel, arrived wearing his big work apron, tools bulged in every pocket. He looked at Mrs. Toggle in her coat. Is the building too cold for you? He asked kindly. Maybe the thermostat's off. I'll go check. Wait, said Mr. Strickler. See, said Carolyn, Mrs. Toggle can't get her coat off because the zipper's stuck. Yes, the principal said, and there's a problem with the thingamajig. Mr. Abel listened carefully. He said. I can see the pull tab is gone. The what? Said the children. And Mrs. Toggle and the nurse and the principal all together. I said the pull tab's gone. Don't worry, I've seen worse. Mr. Abel pulled a pair of needle-nose pliers out of his huge apron pocket. He used the pliers to loosen the grip of the zipper's metal teeth on the shiny fuchsia-colored lining of Mrs. Toggle's coat. Gently with his large fingers, Mr. Abel eased the lining away from the teeth, then he slid the zipper down, down, down. It opened completely. Mr. Abel helped Mrs. Toggle off with her coat. A happy smile spread over Mrs. Toggle's face. Mrs. Schott and Mr. Stickler and the children cheered. You should get a new pull tab for that zipper before you zip it up again, said the custodian. I surely will, Mr. Abel, said Mrs. Toggle. I'm forever grateful to you. The principal went back to important matters. Mrs. Schott rushed off to check a child for chicken pox. Mrs. Toggle and the children traipsed back to their room to tackle the times table. Mr. Abel pulled a small pad from his huge apron pocket and wrote himself a reminder. Remember to look up thingamajig in the dictionary. It was a cute story. I don't know if it was supposed to feel like so many tongue twisters, but it was for me. I don't know. I felt like a lot of... I originally set this book in the lining of the schedule for last year for right after the holidays, because it had snow on the cover. I figured it would have something to do with snow. I mean, I guess maybe it did. Maybe there was snow outside of the school, but we'll never know unless there's a part 2. It was a cute story, though. Glad we read that one. Let me see. Look, I even got a list printed off. I was gonna do that. I printed off every one of the Sundays for 2025, thinking that would be a good way to write the books out and get them listed. Instead, I'm going to use it for birthday call-outs, so I'll know the Sunday before somebody's birthday, unless it just happens to be on their birthday instead of the Sunday before. All right, so last reading is Many Ways to Say I Love You, The Wisdom for Parents and Children from Mr. Rogers, by Mr. Fred Rogers. It may be painful for us to see our children modifying or even rejecting ideas that were important to us and adopting others that could never be comfortable for us. But out of that difference may come the reinforcement of 2 other important values. One is tolerance, and the other is awareness that people who disagree over the things they hold dear really can live together in love and respect. That couldn't be more important today. It is one of the paradoxes of parenting, and often a painful paradox, that even as our children need us for love and trust, they also need us for honest differing. It may be more than just differing over limits and rules. It may be differing about some of what we represent in the way of culture, traditions, and values. Also important. And those will go back in the queues when we're done. And we're going to come over here and we're going to flip this around, do the reading real quick, right? It's like we always do. I'll be back when the week is new, and I'll bring more ideas for you, and you'll have things you want to do, and I will too. I'll think of you when I'm not here, because thinking of people makes them seem near. The friends who know you love you cheerfully, and I do too. We're going to grab our card, which I literally didn't have done in advance by about maybe more than 1 minute. And it said, what are your top 5 things on your bucket list? It took me a minute, and because I couldn't think of 5 things on my bucket list. So what I did write was, aside from all the things that I'd love to see for others, like my kids getting out and staying out of their old life, all of my kids and grandkids succeeding, or all my loved ones succeeding, I don't really think that counts as bucket list stuff, right? So I need to think a little more selfishly, things that I'd like to see or do, right, before. So I could only really think of 2 things, and as I was writing, I was like, maybe a third would be kind of cool to go to Walnut Grove, where the Little House on the Prairie was themed around whatever from Laura Ingalls Wilder. My second on my list would be to take a trip around the Mediterranean Sea. I've always wanted to do that most of my adult life. It would be cool to take a trip on the water and stop in every country that borders the Mediterranean Sea and just think about all the life that was there and all the history that started there. I would love to do that. And then my number 1 bucket list thing, I actually get to do later this year, and that's to visit the Mr. Rogers Institute and Museum and visit his birthplace, which are in Pittsburgh and Latrobe, Pennsylvania. Taking a trip to take my mom up to Salem, and we get to go through and I get to see my Mecca. Like it's gonna be pretty cool. And other than being with family, well, I don't know a better way to celebrate a 50th birthday than get to go see those things. I'll probably cry like a baby. I guess that's it, right? Put the card back in here. Remember that I love you guys, and I'm proud of you guys for being exactly who you're supposed to be, and you're the only one that gets to decide that. And our minds, just like our books, work better when they're open. And hopefully I'm not sick next weekend, and I'll be on time. See you on Sunday. Love you.